Welcome to another episode of Buzz Beat. Thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world. This is Matt Alkiza, and today we are going to share our top 7 NBA draft prospects and look at some of the biggest differences in our big boards, kind of just give a high level look at 7 prospects that are in the Charlotte Hornets range of outcomes come late June. Before we get into that, though, please leave us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to our episodes. Our latest review comes from the user Brian King NC, and he writes in to say, "It's great to have a logic-based review of the Hornets. A lot of data, facts, fun, and just enough hope to keep me listening." I'm joined here today by 3 very, very hopeful individuals, Darian, Brian, and James, a couple of the best draft minds we have in the Hornet space. And like I said, we're here to share the top 7 of our big boards because it would cover all of the possibilities for the Charlotte Hornets. Although the odds lean in Charlotte's favor of landing a top 4 pick, a 14% chance to land the overall number 1 prize, Cooper Flag, there's a slim chance that the 4 teams jump the Hornets, pushing them back to the 7th pick. If you want our top 14, be on the lookout for our Google Doc on May 1st that you can get by subscribing to BuzzBeat Plus on Substack. So we are here. We have our top 7 consensus prospects, and I'm going to run through those real quick. And like I said, we're just going to do a high-level overview of these 7. At number 1, I already mentioned his name, Cooper Flag. Behind him is Dylan Harper at number 2, VJ Edgecombe at number 3, Ace Bailey at number 4, Con Knipple at number 5, Colin Murray Boyles at number 6, and Derek Queen at number 7. So that is our consensus top 7. We have them all ranked in different orders. I'm going to start with you, Darian. The consensus for the 3 for myself, James, and Brian is Cooper Flag number 1, Dylan Harper number 2. You have VJ Edgecombe number 2, and we're going to start there. What is your reasoning behind having him ahead of Dylan Harper? What do you like about VJ? What are the parts of his game that have you ranking him as your number 2 overall prospect?
Well, first of all, I should say that I really do like Dylan Harper. I mean, it's really tough for me to make that decision. I think that Dylan Harper is going to be an excellent player, and he's really kind of like my type of guard, especially in today's NBA with the size, and I like the way he plays. I like that he's a strong, bigger guard, which is something that we've seen more and more of work out. But for VJ Edgecombe, to me, I just have this feeling about him. I don't really know how to put it into words quite yet. I think it's still going to take some time with me watching this film. But I think that one thing that really impressed me throughout his season at Baylor was I really enjoy, especially when it's a one and done, players who are able to overcome struggles. And I think that his first 10, maybe 12 games at Baylor, he struggled a lot, to the point where a lot of people didn't, they were wondering why he was so hyped. And then I think for his ability to be able to bounce back, his athleticism, his potential to be a shot maker, I think I do. Same with Dylan Harper, but I do look for him to be a little better with shot creating, even though we've seen little hits and bits and pieces of that. I think that's something he still needs to work on, but I like his versatility as a defender. And I'm more so thinking that, especially with the Hornets, how does that fit all together? And I think that I just like his fit a little more. I almost have this feeling where, was it 2 years ago with Amin Thompson? They're not the same player, but more so with Amin, it felt as though there's some things to his game. If you add it, he's the consensus second best player in the draft. And that's almost how I feel with VJ Edgecombe, is that right now he may not be second, but I feel as though he has everything you need to be that second best player in this draft. I think that he just needs like the little bit of work to get him over the hump. And once he reaches that stride, I think we'll see this Amin Thompson type of transformation, which can you really call it a transformation? Because I feel like I can even say for people here, we all saw, how good Amin Thompson was going to be. It was more so worried about the shot. But with VJ Edgecombe, I think that he has all the tools. It's just getting over the hump. And then once he's over the hump, that's when everybody's going to be like, how did they pass on this guy? I think it just feels as though it's going to be one of those stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bet on Edgecombe is with the athleticism, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's the explosiveness, the straight line speed, the open floor speed. the way he's able to sort of like sync that up with the handle, which I think made real strides for him throughout the year. Like he played better as the season went along for Baylor, and certainly some of that was he shot the ball better. But if you were watching him play, like he was getting into tighter windows, getting downhill, touching paint on a pretty frequent basis. I think he and the guy like Jeremy or Jeremy Fears at Oklahoma, two of the better, just I guess Harper for that matter too. But Fears and Edgecombe really with their speed and their ability to touch the paint, certainly something that like stands out with those two guys. And I don't know, like, I think I do worry to an extent about Edgecombe's size, like, he is on the smaller end. I know he has a plus wingspan, which is good, but, like, that is gonna be something to consider with him going forward, but I think if you're making the case for him at 2, it has to be just that, like, he's one of the best, if not the best, sort of, like, guard, athlete in the draft, and that's maybe again, I have Harper, ahead of him, but my guess would be that that's sort of like the thing that would put him like at least a notch above. Maybe there's some other stuff we can get into between those 2, but yeah, I would just say like Edgecombe's athletic profile is pretty special, and even for like a loaded draft this year.
James, you've been doing a lot of work on Edgecombe, it seems, from your Twitter feed. Do you have him and Harper in a similar tier, or do you think Harper is a tier ahead of Edgecombe when you're scouting those two guys?
Yeah, I've got Harper comfortably in the tier above VJ. I would actually we should mention that all of our rankings were Hornet specific, right? So I've got VJ Edgecombe 3. I have Ace Bailey 4. If I was like ranking this for generic NBA teams, I would have Ace Bailey ahead of VJ Edgecombe. I'd have probably him at 4 or 5. Look, I think the fit is really neat in Charlotte. And when you have prospects that are relatively packed closely together, you can look at, well, what does VJ Edgecombe do? Well, he's a good defender. He can fit nicely between LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller, if that really is the core, which I'm still a little bit unsure if it is, but Jeff Peterson maintains it is at this point. And if you talk about Hornets DNA, like the physicality, work ethic, approach to things, ability to stretch the floor, like everything ticks all the boxes for Vijka Edgecombe. So for that reason, like I bumped him up a little bit. But for me, the high-end outcome of VJ is like elite role player. Like third, fourth scoring option, maybe even fourth or fifth, like, and just everywhere defensively and a smart connective playmaker. And for me, Dylan Harper is like could be a De'Aaron Fox type, all-star, a guy that you can play through offensively. If this team have questions about LaMelo Ball, even if they don't, I think he makes a lot of sense for the Hornets. And I just see him being a guy that you can build your franchise around, where I see Edgecombe being a guy that can be kind of a complementary guy around other great pieces. And they're just a little bit easier to find in my point of view. So yeah, I have Edgecombe clearly a tier down from Dylan Harper in this exercise.
Yes, we got a comment here from Pip saying, so you're telling me Rutgers had 2 of the best players in the draft class, but went 15 and 18 this year. If Bailey and Harper were so great, you'd think it would have translated to winning, which that can kind of take us to the conversation about the 2 Rutgers guys. Dylan Harper, our number 2 consensus prospect, 2.25 was his average overall ranking. Darian was the one bringing him down from a solid 2. And then Ace Bailey was tied for our 4th overall ranked prospect with Duke's Con Knipple, the 4.75 average position. Brian, when you're looking at those 2 guys, their season at Rutgers, let's start with Harper first. What stuck out to you about his game, and how do you put him at number 2 on your big board?
Yeah, he's been pretty clearly number 2 for me, whether it's Hornets specific or, team agnostic. The size, his ability to drive, to get into the paint. He is incredibly powerful for a guard. And I would just say, like, for the questions about, Rutgers struggling this season, like, one, Harper missed some time with an injury. So, that was sort of part of the problem with them. With those 2 on the court, that I actually looked this up the other day, with Harper and Bailey on the court together, Rutgers was actually plus 91 in 728 minutes. Not like amazing, but when those 2 guys were healthy and both playing, Rutgers was pretty good. This team just 3 through 12 was pretty bad. And any other way you sort of like stagger the lineups, whether it was Harper on, Bailey off, they were bad. Harper off, Bailey on, they were even worse. Bailey, a guy that I'm sure we'll get to later in this pod, just in terms of sort of like struggling to be like a lead, play initiator, shot creator for others, really needing Harper there to kind of help feed him some of those catch and shoot looks and to draw attention when Rutgers would get into some of their movement stuff. But just really, really like Harper, like him in early offense, like him creating slot pick and rolls, picking a pistol action. His ability to, I think, both be patient, getting downhill when he's attacking drop coverage. You want guys to be able to make decisions at the last possible second. I think Harper is pretty good at doing that. Knipple also good at doing that as well when seeing drop. And I just think Harper has the ability that if he's going to get 2 on the ball, he makes good decisions with it. He can hit a bunch of different passes, and he has the strength to really like punish different matchups. Like I was watching Rutgers Michigan State tape the other day, and I really like Jace Richardson from Michigan State a lot. But I mean, Harper was, I believe, hurt for some of that game, but he was also able to bully Jace Richardson when he had a couple, probably 2 or 3 possessions when those two guys were matched up. So I would just, for me with Harper, it's the fact that I think he's a guy that you can build a top 10 offense around with him as a primary creator, a guy that's taking a lot of usage and play creation opportunities. And I like long term, I'm not too worried about the shot. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be able to just do damage against all different kinds of coverages, whether it's drop, switch, getting 2 on the ball. I think he makes good decisions in those looks too. So Harper for me, number 2, regardless of team. And, if the Hornets end up with the number 2 pick, it's really interesting because I think they should probably go Harper. It just sort of like opens up, another series of conversations, I would guess, with LaMelo.
And that was part of my reasoning was that and James made a good point that's what we're being told, that, the core is LaMelo and Brandon and, who's going to be that third piece. So yeah, if Harper's drafted in, it would make me wonder, which I can't really tell what the true commitment is to LaMelo right now anyway.
Just to follow up as well on Pip's comment there, do you remember Anthony Edwards' Georgia team, right? Didn't they went 16-16? That was one of the things used against him is, hey, why isn't this team better if he's the number 1 pick? You just have to realize that these players are not finished products, right? Ace Bailey especially is like a long-term potential pick. He is not someone who is exceptional right now, but has exceptional skills and tools. And Anthony Edwards was kind of the same way as well. So I don't think it's fair, especially in the world of super seniors, nil transfers, to just expect like 2 freshmen to come into a team, a pretty poor Rutgers team, and just turn them into contenders in a difficult conference too. So I don't think that's something that you can hold against them too much.
Yeah, and it was a brand new team. Everybody except like 4 players were, new players. They didn't have a big. They put Ace Bailey at big sometimes. So that's just
the nature of college hoops now too, though. Like these rosters are getting microwaved for the most part every offseason. But like we're going to talk about Colin Murray Boyles too. That South Carolina got swamped in the SEC this year too. But like he's still an awesome, lottery prospect too. So it's great. I think if you have the guys like Cooper Flagg or Knipple, Kaman Malawach that got to really experience like top tier, success and play in big games, etc. But a lot of these other guys like, Edgecombe and Trey Johnson, their teams were, round 1 fodder in the NCAA tournament. And several of these other guys, their teams, didn't even make the tournament. So I think you kind of have to get beyond that. And if you want to like sort of have a greater existential conversation about it, it probably falls on like a guy like Steve Peichel, who assembled and coached the Rutgers roster this season, not, what Dylan Harper's like evaluation as a, lottery draft prospect.
Yeah, Brian, I'll throw it back to you. You were the lowest of the 4 of us on Ace Bailey, and I'll give James and Darian a chance to respond to what you say. You had him at number 6 on your big board. The rest of us had him 4 or 5. What is it about Ace Bailey that had you down there? And can you So your tops, I'll run through your top 7 specifically. Cooper Flag, Dylan Harper, VJ Edgecombe, Colin Murray Boyles at 4, which is something we'll talk about a little bit later. Con Knipple at 5, Ace Bailey at 6, and Trey Johnson from Texas at 7. Is Ace Bailey in a tier with Knipple and Murray Boyles? Is he in a tier with Trey Johnson? And what's your reasoning behind that?
I would actually bunch all of those guys up in a, I would put them all in probably a pretty similar tier. Bailey, I must say, is like a player archetype that has given me some trouble like in the years past, like the sort of like tall shooter with good traits who you're possibly projecting, some sort of like playmaking, some sort of like larger playmaking role, a play creation role on the next level into, like if you're going to be taking someone like that this high in the draft. I think my like opinions on guys like Cam Reddish or Jabari Smith, like I think I've felt pretty confident about those. Brandon Miller was someone that a couple of seasons ago gave me issues, but Bailey, incredible size, length, is able to apply that on the defensive side of the floor, as a playmaker at times. It certainly helps give him a high release point. I really like him coming off screens, shooting off of movement, and Rutgers had some good stuff to kind of get him coming off looks this season. He certainly is going to get stronger, but just someone who's struggles right now being able to, I believe, create consistent separation when he's looking to create his own shots. He does not create for others at the moment right now either. So I, especially like as it pertains to the Hornets, if with these rankings, the thought of putting someone like that, again, assuming like LaMelo and Brandon are sort of like, part of the infrastructure here for a while too, feels like you're adding another really nice, young, sort of like talented, tall shot maker, but also someone that's skinny and doesn't really pressure the rim either. And so for these sort of like franchise specific rankings, that is sort of what gets me to drop Bailey a little bit further. But honestly, even if we were like, again, going team agnostic, I think I would be lower on Bailey, maybe a little bit more than just the consensus on here. So like him a lot. I absolutely see him playing in the NBA for a very long time. Who wouldn't? 6'10", with those kind of like, defensive traits and movement shooting skills. I just see, I think, more two-way playmaking ahead of him with some of these other potential picks. So that's why I would lean, whether it's Charlotte or it's someone else, why I would lean in the direction of some of these other guys ahead of Bailey, who I do like quite a bit as a prospect. But yeah, those are sort of my hangups with him.
I mean, I can come in. I think for Ace, the one thing I think steps him apart maybe from like really tall shooters in the past that I've looked at is the defense, or the defensive potential, I should say, right? His length like just shows up on the tape, like getting deflections in the passing lanes. He comes out of nowhere for these blocks. Like he could really be a true like kind of 3-and-D 6'10" shooter, which is pretty unique in some respects. The challenge for me is I just think he has to completely relearn the game. Like the way he plays basketball, like holding the ball down by his toes for 5 seconds, then taking a pull-up. Like there's about 4 guys in the world who can play that way in the NBA. And for the rest of them, it's just not going to work. And I think you'll have to have patience for that. I think you have to have patience for his body to fill out as well. Like Brian said, he's pretty weak at the moment, and that's going to get worse getting to the NBA. But it is no doubt that his athleticism, when he has a runway, his length, his shooting ability is at the highest level that you can expect to see from a college prospect coming out. It's just like what's between the ears for me, which I have like questions around. How long will that take to come online? How high does the motor run? And for me, that's why I dropped him down a little bit. But if you told me right now, and this is probably maybe controversial, if you told me that like Ace Bailey were to be a better player than Cooper Flag in 10 years, I would think that is a feasible outcome, because I do think like he is probably more go-to scorer, play all the way through him as your key offensive scoring player than Cooper. Now Cooper's on another level as a playmaker, but it's it always sounds crazy to say those things now, but you look back in the draft 10 years ago and you're like, how on earth did that happen, right? But I think he's the one player in this draft, the only one, who could supplant Cooper Flagg if he reached his 99th percentile outcome. I just don't know how likely that is.
He's also a good bit younger than Edgecombe and Knipple too. Like I believe a full year younger than those two guys, sort of to like there's perhaps some, there's more runway to work with. And obviously with his tools and shooting ability, there's a lot to like with Ace.
And is Charlotte the best place for that? Like, I don't think it is. That's why I bumped him down my rankings. And I don't know what you guys think. Would you have the same concerns of someone almost having to kind of like be re-educated on the game in what is like a pretty difficult situation to learn to play basketball? I mean, we saw it for Tijon Salon this year, right?
Right. And that's kind of how I felt. I almost wish I applied the logic I used for Ace Bailey to have him as high as I did at 4, which I honestly probably could have had him higher. But my biggest thing was with the Hornets, it just feels as though his game is repetitive. I mean, I've seen him be compared to Brandon Miller. We see that when Brandon Miller's on the court with Miles Bridges no longer tries to get to the rim. So it's just Brandon Miller and Miles just chucking shots. What does that?
I actually don't like the Brandon Miller comp though. I
don't either. Yeah.
I've seen it thrown out there, and I feel like it's just recency bias because it was a 6'9" shooter recently. I think Brandon Miller I just think they're pretty different players if you watch them play. Like Brandon Miller was a ball mover, made smart decisions, and doesn't also have like the size length. It doesn't show up on defense like it does for him either. But sorry, I interrupted you there. But I think
you're
that's
fine.
something that we're going to hear a lot in the next month. Yeah. And I just really disagree with it.
I think Brandon Miller has entered himself in those conversations where anytime someone's over 6'8" that can shoot, it's Brandon Miller, it's Brandon Ingram, it's KD. I'm glad we finally stopped with the KD ones, which we still hear that about Ace Bailey a little bit.
Michael Porter is another one of these too.
That's another one,
another of the tall shooters.
I just don't like the fit with Charlotte, but I do agree with Jane. Maybe I'm not sure about the Cooper Flagg part, but. Yeah, I could see it just because of pure just his physical presence. But in general, he definitely seems like he can, if he gets that 99th percentile, he could be an amazing player. I just don't know if I really like the fit with Charlotte. Like it just doesn't make any sense as far as just what we have going on. But the thing is, we know that this roster's constantly changing. At least for me, I don't know which direction it's really going to go to know how someone like Ace is going to fit. That's kind of where I struggle with, maybe y'all have like a better idea, but for me, that's kind of what stops me from really looking at Ace. It's just because right now, what I saw last year, I just don't see how it works at all.
I just need more information. I feel like on the current the new-ish admin in terms of like where they're at from player development, because I just don't, at this point, I feel like I need a little bit more. And like, we mentioned to John a little bit ago, like he to me is a really interesting case study for like where this franchise is from a player dev standpoint. Certainly Brandon Miller is too.
Well, everyone got better, Brian. Remember, that's what Jeff said at Excellencies. Everyone got better this year, so that's where they're at right now.
Yeah, I guess depending on what your criteria is, yes, they everyone got older. We definitely, and so if you want to correlate,
and wiser.
Yeah, exactly. So if you want to correlate those two things, I mean, it's irrefutable. But yeah, no, I'm slightly more optimistic. In part, we sort of talked about this last week with like the season-ending press conferences, just sort of like the front office, the coaching staff, reemphasizing the patient approach they're taking. Well, like a really huge piece of that has to be internal development. And I think so far, like this current regime has done some good stuff from like turning things over, finding value on the margins, whether it's, got someone like Moussa Diabate, being willing to move off of veterans to get future draft picks. But sort of like the next big piece that we kind of need to see how things progress is going to be, the sort of like internal development with guys like LaMelo, Miller, Salon, and then certainly whomever's coming in this season too.
Here's kind of just a broad scope question before we dive into more prospects specifically. When you are putting together your Hornets specific draft board, and James, I'll kick it to you first. How much were you really thinking about the guys on the roster versus maybe the philosophy of the coaching staff and the front office that we have been able to garner in this past year?
That's a really good question, actually, because I think it's really important that we discuss that. For me, I don't put that much stock in the players because I think Brandon Miller is the only player who I feel sure will be back on this roster next year. Maybe T. Salon as well, but for slightly different reasons. For me, it is all down philosophies. And from what I understand so far, from what we've been able to get out of Charles Lee, they want two-way players, people who approach with defensive intensity. The defense is the first thing that Charles Lee's coached. That's what he focused on all year. So if you're a guy who cares more about offense and doesn't really care about the defensive end, there's going to be challenges there. And you can't be someone who just does it like inconsistently. They want someone who has physicality, especially rebounding on the offensive glass, ability to crash there. They want disruption, deflections, active and shift activity. They want people to be able to stretch the floor. It's a high 3-point volume contest. This team needs also rim pressure to create those 3-point looks, and that's where they struggle. They need to get to the free throw line. They need to be able to get to the rim, draw help. That's something they've not been able to do. So I'm looking at kind of like wider philosophies of what the team need to do about what they've talked about this year, more so than like, how does Josh Green and Miles Bridges fit next to this player? Like even LaMelo Ball, like a lot of us have got Dylan Harper too here. That's going to create some questions if that's the pick. Like they can play together, but it doesn't matter. That's going to create questions. But I think it's the right thing to do when you look at what this franchise needs in terms of upgrading its talent level. Yeah, and another mention from Pitt there, actually. Character. It's a great comment on the YouTube. That's something I missed out. Like, why T. Salon basically got drafted is because they just fell in love with his personality and his work ethic. Right?
I have the Tiger.
Yeah, that's the thing. So that's another thing that they're looking for. So you can get into dangerous territory with things like that. Like, but that is something the front office clearly value. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I try to genuinely always be like best prospect available and just sort of like even outside of like players currently on the roster, because again, that's incredibly fluid, and even outside of sort of like scheme, coaching staff, franchise philosophy, like that kind of stuff. For this case though, like as we were sort of like going Hornet specific, I did try to factor it into a little bit. There's no players that I would be considering outside of LaMelo and Miller, like at the absolute max. I think Miller's the one sort of like real guy. James, you mentioned this a second ago. That was sort of like why I probably came out a little bit lower on Bailey. That's also probably, we can talk about, maybe even use this as a transition to talk about Derek Queen. But that was sort of, I really like Derek Queen a lot as a prospect, and I've sort of been toggling between him and Malawach for center one in this draft. I don't know if I see Derek Queen as like a 5 with like the current infrastructure in Charlotte. I love his talent. I love his passing ability, but doesn't shoot threes, at least not yet. And when I think of like a defensive 5 under Coach Charles Lee, I think of scheme versatility in terms of how they're either how they're defending pick and roll, or whom they're cross matched in defending along the back line. Putting a guy like Bridges on the opposing 5 and having the Charlotte's 5 be the sort of like backline helper, low man defender. And I'm just not sure if I see Queen fitting into like that archetype, barring some like real sort of like physio development with him. Again, really like his talent. So certainly something that I would bring into the picture, but knowing how quickly stuff can change, whether it's a roster being flipped over or a star player being moved or a coach being fired. I mean, those timelines seem to shrink on an annual basis in the NBA. I am always sort of like zeroing in on best player available. But I think because there is some sort of like infrastructure in place with Charlotte, you do have to, if you're thinking team specific, you do need to at least bake that that needs to get priced in at least a little bit, because I think there's somewhat of a runway for the this current group to work with. So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, I'd be curious to see if anyone else had any sort of like other thoughts on, you know, philosophy, especially when you're drafting high in the lottery here.
For me, I've always wanted him to just go best player available, but in this particular exercise, I went with more so the roster, and I can openly admit that that's strictly just because of how things have gone in the past. I've plenty of times have said this is what the team should do, and they don't do it. And I rather just go back and say, you know, I made this decision based on what the current roster is, just because I have my questions about whether or not LaMelo is going to be on the team. I think we've all talked about how, you know, how Miles Bridges, it doesn't seem like he's going to be on this team, even though, you know, he didn't get traded this deadline, and people think that's the sign he's going to stay all the remaining of his contract, which I don't think that's true. But for me, it's just hard, specifically with this team, to do go off philosophy when there are players on the roster. I just don't know if are they going to make these moves. I still don't know to think, like, we don't know about Mark Williams, which I think the idea would be to trade him, but we still don't know how the rest of the league continues to see him. And obviously the league saw him differently than what we saw when the original trade happened. So it's just hard for me to kind of differentiate the two. That's why, like, for you guys to be able to do that, like, I wish I could do. It's just hard for me to, and it just could be the fan in me, but it's just really difficult for me to separate the two. So I always just have to go based on what's on the current roster, because that's what we have at the end of the day. So there's definitely some things I probably would change, but for the most part, I had players in tiers. If it was a toss up, I just kind of went based on what we have. But if, you know, LaMelo was gone, then Dylan Harper would be higher. If Brandon Miller was gone, which we all said, I agree that he's probably the one constant that will stay, then I would probably hire Ace Bailey. But as of right now, I can just go off what we have.
Yeah, I think part of that is, you know, Miller is good, but also, like, you know, he has 2 years left on his rookie contract. And I just don't see, one, there aren't that many guys on the roster that you could say that about now. And I mean, certainly a guy like Williams, I guess, too, has 1 year left coming into this season. But just like some of this is a byproduct of, I think, of sort of like where the contracts are too. But certainly Miller checks a lot of boxes from a talent, you know, obviously a talent standpoint moving forward.
So I feel like a couple of things that stuck out to me there can take us into the next prospect we're going to talk about, who is kind of in a similar tier to Derek Queen on our boards, and kind of consensus. This guy is behind Derek Queen, but we have him ahead of Derek Queen. It's Colin Murray Boyles from South Carolina. He's the guy that I feel like I love his motor. He's a really good, versatile defender, and feels like, from what I watch from him, kind of oozes the Hornets DNA that we keep talking about. He's going to be versatile on defense. He has his hands in the passing lane all the time. We saw Charlotte trade for Josh Okogie. They signed Josh Green, two guys who are not great offensive players, but can give you a lot on defense. And Murray Boyles kind of fits that mold as well. Brian, I'll throw it back to you. You're by far the highest on Murray Boyles, with having him number 4 on your board. Talk about a little bit about him and the idea of him fitting in Charlotte and kind of, you know, having that Hornets DNA we've talked about.
Yeah, high impact forward, elite playmaking on both sides of the court. Athletically, not super, you know, not like a super explosive vertical athlete, but very coordinated, good hands. Just like when the ball is around him, whether he's like catching a pocket pass or it's a long rebound or whatever, he just like engulfs it. Quick hands, strong hands, good foot speed, the reaction time, his ability to sort of recognize and diagnose stuff as a backline defensive helper. Kind of like when he's able to be the sort of like low man help defender, and it can kind of like plug holes and be in different spots. A guy that created a ton of steals, you know, a ton of blocks at South Carolina. He's going to not, I mean, I don't think he's going to be everyone's flavor. I could see him being divisive. Like, he will turn 20 in June. He's smaller. You know, I've seen him listed as at 6'8", 245 in some places, or 6'7", 230 and some other places. Either way, like he's undersized, but good length. Rumored to have a 7+ foot wingspan. He's incredibly strong. So for me, I see him as a guy that can just do a ton of stuff for you defensively. If you're cross matching and he's guarding the opposing 5, you can use him to switch. If he's playing, nominally playing your 4, he can be your backline helper and plug holes and be a guy that can really clean up the defensive glass and be a playmaker for you on the backside of your defense. Obviously very limited as a 3-point shooter. Just 9 threes over 2 seasons at South Carolina. All 9 were this year. Not a particularly great free throw shooter either. He's 70% from the line, but I do think he shows, if you're using touch as like an indicator, I do think his touch on like difficult interior finishing shots is really, really good. Started to experiment more as a pick and roll ball handler and isolation creator this season. And I just love his connective playmaking and passing, whether it's, him playing at the nail against the zone defense or him on the short roll, thinking about how often or how big that kind of playmaking is in the next level, and how CMB is a guy that can catch and finish on the move, or really make a variety of different passes, whether it's there's another player in the dunker spot, or he's skipping it out or kicking it out to the weak side. And I've been on this. I think Richie could probably back me up on this, since like late 2 seasons ago when Grant Williams first came over, like Brandon Miller's rookie season. I really liked Charlotte having a front court hub that they could use to help get Miller open, whether it was handoffs or it was when the Hornets would run that, Steve Clifford would run that little like corner action with the low split cut, and Grant Williams initiating at the high post or at the elbow, and Miller sort of like being targeted as this off-ball mover. So I think CMB is a guy that could also help Miller get good looks offensively. So for me, it's the playmaking, it's the defensive upside, and I am hoping that he's going to become a more competent shooter, because if not, that's probably going to limit sort of like the high end outcomes for him. But even without that, I still think he has the chance to be like a really solid defensive player and a guy that can help out in offense with his passing and interior finishing.
Yeah, I like the Grant Williams shout there. I can't remember the exact Bart Torvik query that I ran of Murray Boyle's numbers, but Grant Williams was one of the comps that came up statistically for him. And I think there is a lot of, like you said, a lot of offensive similarities between the two of them as a screener, as a playmaker. And when Williams was healthy, they used him in actions with both Miller and Ball a ton. Mm-hmm. And I feel like Charlotte's offensive infrastructure changed a lot when Williams went down. They didn't have him to use as a screener. He had shot a lot of transition threes when he was in the lineup, and Murray Boyles isn't going to give you that. But yeah, a lot of similarities between him and Grant Williams. And, I don't know when Williams is projected to be back, but Murray Boyles seems like the kind of guy that can kind of slide into that role and develop into the power forward that Jeff Peterson and Charles Lee maybe hope Tijan Salon can be in 2 or 3 more years. So there's another guy we'll move on to a different prospect. The last guy in our top 7 who has not really been talked about yet is Con Knipple from Duke. And he's a guy that I really, really like his game. I think he fits really well in Charlotte. Charlotte's one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in the league. And a lot of that does have to do with inaccurate shooters, but I think more of that is the lack of rim pressure, like James was talking about earlier. They don't have a lot of guys who are drawing help. They don't have guards that are touching the paint, and Knipple isn't going to be the guy that gives you a ton of that, but he is a knockdown 3-point shooter. I think he probably is going to end up being the best shooter in this class. And he does a little bit of everything on offense. He showed a decent handle in the pick and roll, developed a mind meld with Common Malawach later in the season. He can kind of be your secondary, tertiary ball handler if you think LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller are your top 2 guys. James, how much work have you done on Knipple? I see you just put in the YouTube chat that Desmond Bane is a name that you like for him. Talk a little bit about Knipple and his game.
Outside of Cooper Flag, Con Knipple is my favorite guy to watch in this year's draft, and it's really easy. Because they're on the same team, so it makes it easy. I've watched a lot of Duke this year. Look, probably not as much as Brian, but I've watched a lot of Duke. And I just think everything that guy does makes sense. that's the Steve Cliffordism right there that he used to say all the time. Like, he just never ever makes a bad decision, even if a shot doesn't go in. And the big question is, well, how much upside is there, right? Like, he can be a high efficiency role player playing alongside a great Duke team, but we saw when a flag went down, we got a window into what does a Con Knipple focused Duke team look like. And that team was still able to score at a decent level and play well. And Con was able to play well and keep his efficiency. Look, you're going to look at him and go 6'7" white guy, kind of boxy, not bursty. Like, this guy is going to get blown by on defense. That is not the case. He is super tough, physical, moves well, uses his chest really well. I was watching the game I watched the day against Stanford, where he's like switching on to Maxime Renault, the 22-year-old senior from Stanford, 7'1", and he's like contesting him in the post and forcing misses and forcing hard catches. Like, there's defensive versatility there. So for me, he's just like dribble, pass, shoot, super team-orientated guy, no ego whatsoever. I wanted to have him higher, and I thought I was going to come in here and be the Con Knipple guy. And it seems like I've got him basically ranked the same as all of you. I thought having him 5 was going to be high. I do like question the overall upside. Like, I think he's probably going to grade out as like Desmond Bain. I think would be a great outcome for him, and he's basically a third option on a playoff team. Mm-hmm. And I think if you're talking about a top 3, top 4 pick, you're maybe hoping for more than that. And I don't know if I see it, but I'd have to say I'd be real happy coming out this draft with Con Knipple if Charlotte were outside the top 3. That would make me pretty happy with that. So I got a lot of time for Knipple, as you can tell.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with you of him being my favorite prospect to watch so far outside of Flag. And your Steve Clifford-ism there makes a lot of sense. He can just kind of do a little bit of everything. But what I really like is that he brings the elite shooting. Like, he's not like a jack of all trades, master of none. He is a master shooter. He is going to be able to be a guy that you can run off of screens and have him catch and shoot. There isn't probably never going to be a ton of juice on the ball, but I do think that there's a lot that he can bring you on offense that would fit really, really nicely in Charlotte. James, something you said, and Darian, maybe you can speak a little bit to this, is you said if you take him at the 5th pick, you're hoping to get more than like a number 3 player on a playoff team. I think that kind of speaks to the level of talent in this class not being as high as it was maybe hyped to be around last summer. I feel like I remember reading early draft stuff, late August, September of last year, and people were talking about how this is going to be the next great draft class. But the overall level of talent doesn't seem like it's as good. It panned out to be as good as it was. Darian, when you're thinking of this draft class as a whole, do you feel like it's one of the better draft classes we've seen in recent memory? What just your overall thoughts on this class of prospects?
My overall thoughts is simply that I just feel as though these players are more, I don't know if I want to say NBA ready, but you can kind of see, you have a better idea of what their NBA, bodies and what their NBA production will look like. I feel like last year, at least one of the things I was saying about last year's class was that you could tell that they were just all going to be like really good role players because everybody was upset that there wasn't some superstar. But with last year's class, it was like, no, there's easily 20, really solid NBA players, and that's just from seeing them for, their freshman year or in college. This time, I think that you have a better idea of it, and it may not have the superstar talent that you're expecting, but I think that what I really like about this class is that there are all kinds of profiles here. Like I have, like for Con Knipple, I have him as like the ultimate utility player, but in my notes is like, I said that in the nicest way possible, like in the highest degree. Like he's the Michael Jordan of utility players, as to just be ridiculous. Like I really like his game, and that's the kind of things I think you get as we talk about Colin Murray Boyles. Like he's one of the, if there's tiers of Grant Williams, he's probably the best, could be one of the best versions of Grant Williams. And that's just like what I like most about this class is that they may be these players that aren't KDs of the world and whatnot. They're not, everybody's going to be Cooper Flag, but I think that you have some highly, highly talented players, and they all can do you. If you're a team that has a need, you could find your need in this class. And that's my favorite thing about it, which for a team like the Hornets, I think that there's a lot of, like, I wish we could get more picks in this draft. Like, this is a really good draft class in that aspect to me.
Yeah, I see a lot of like for sure starters. I feel in this class, and certainly more than just Cooper Flag is going to pop as I think a star. We're only talking about our top 7 tonight, but I think if you extended probably all of our sort of like, where our like lottery rankings are now, you would get into the fears and the Jakachonis prospect types who sort of like profile potentially as like on ball, sort of like offensive engines, up there with a Harper or whatever. And my guess would be that's why some of those guys are, you're going to land in the top 5 on the big boards for some other, people doing the draft, or maybe even some teams that are going through this process. I also, just to circle back, I love the Bane comparison for Knipple. When I was doing the Chucking Darts draft podcast a few weeks ago, that was where Chuck and I, that was the comp we both used, was Desmond Bane. Knipple, just the movement shooting with him is phenomenal. He's so good at setting up defenders. Like, a huge part of Duke's offense this season was him running off of screens, staggered screens, and not just to get into catch and shoots, but to let Khan try to like curl and get downhill and get into the paint. He's really good attacking drop coverage, whether it's in the pick and roll or curling off of a pin down. And he and Malawach, again, whether it was middle ball screens or it was Malawach setting the down screen for Knipple and then diving to the empty corner, and Knipple, he's probably not actually 6'7". Like, I'm guessing at the combine, he's going to come in at like 6'5" or 6'5.5", something like that. But he is incredibly strong. And a guy who can pass like that with his strength and his patience is someone who can really amplify and boost his shooting profile, because like, you can't just hard close out on him, because he can attack that in a bunch of different ways. Yeah. And again, he has the strength, and his scalability is just, James talked about it, what he showed over 3 games at the ACC tournament, becoming atop the scouting report for Duke and having his efficiency jump way up. And then really him carrying Duke to wins against Georgia Tech, Louisville, UNC. Like, I know the ACC was down this year, but actually like pretty good teams, pretty good defenses. So Khan, really awesome player. And again, if the Hornets end up in that 4 range or whatever, certainly someone that would make a lot of sense, and would be a guy that I would be happy to sort of like welcome into the fold, even if he has sort of like a little bit less creation upside than Jakachonis or Fears, who I have, maybe a tier below him as far as prospects go.
Cool. We will start to close out here. James, I'm going to send it over to you first. Can you run through your top 7? Maybe if you feel comfortable putting them in tiers, do that. And then if you have any other stray thoughts on these guys that you have not given quite yet, we'd love to hear those. But before we get there, just need to say there's a full Cooper Flag episode coming next week or in the coming weeks. So we didn't talk about him much today. There's not much to say about him that hasn't already been said or that won't be said in the coming weeks on this podcast. Number 1 overall prospect for all 4 of us. I don't want to call him a flawless NBA draft prospect, but as his season at Duke continued, it was really hard to find any flaws in his game. And whatever team lands him, crossing our fingers, that is Charlotte. He truly is the franchise changer that he is built to be. But James, I'll throw it to you. Run through your top 7, put them in tiers if you want, and then share any stray thoughts you have on these guys.
Yeah, so I've got Cooper Flag in a tier of his own, and you're right, not much to say. I think the interesting thing with Flag to talk about is where does he rank in the history of number 1 picks, and like just how high is that ceiling? Okay, how high can he take you if he's the best guy on your team? I think that's like the interesting debate around Cooper Flag. Agree with you. The discussion on weaknesses could be a short one. I then have Dylan Harper in a tier of his own, mainly because I just think the floor with Dylan Harper is like super safe. Like, I just think he's going to be a low end all-star, and the rest of these like guys have a way to go, but could probably be, could get above that level if they were to actually hit their apex. I then probably have a tier of VJ Edgecombe, Ace Bailey, Con Knipple, and then after that I have a tier drop off again. So that's three tiers there, basically, clearly in that top six. And then after that, Derek Queen, Malawak, Fears, Trey Johnson. I need to do some more film work on that, like to dig in a little bit deeper, but that's where I'm at currently.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. Similarly, my top, I'll go 1 through 7 and then put them into tiers. Flag 1 in his own tier, similar to James. I have Harper 2 in his own tier. Third tier, I have VJ Edgecombe, Murray Boyles, and Con Knipple, and then Ace Bailey and Trey Johnson at 6 and 7 in a fourth tier too. So, the flag sort of like where he ends up as if he's your go-to guy is going to be interesting. And I think that when we have that episode and we talk about that a little bit more, that's going to be fun because I think we're going to be able to just get into like offensive philosophy in that regard too, because I have sort of some thoughts on how Duke reoriented the 5-out offense in Durham around Cooper this season. Because I think that is something that also like opens up more pathways for him in sort of like a Tatum kind of level. If he is, sort of like the primary guy or the top ball handler for an offensive system in the next level. But yeah, Flag, Harper, Edgecombe, CMB, Con, Ace, and then Trey Johnson.
All right. So for me, I have Cooper, as everyone said, in a tier of his own at number 1. And then for me, I have VJ and Dylan in a similar tier. But I do like what James said about Dylan Harper's floor. That's one of my favorite things about him is that his floor is very safe, and it's probably one of the better floors outside of probably Cooper, of course. And they're in the tier of their own. And then I have Ace Bailey, Con Knipple in the tier of their own. And then I round it out with Colin Murray and Trey Johnson, 6 and 7.
Cool. Yeah, and I'll close this out. I have same as everybody. Cooper Flag, number 1, tier of his own. I'm similar to James. Dylan Harper, number 2 in a tier of his own. I think James said it really well. Really high floor. I think you know what you're getting with Harper. And when I think of the Hornets especially, they are in desperate need of a guy that can get to the rim, a guy that can create advantages for teammates outside of LaMelo Ball. And I think Harper does that. And this is probably another topic for another episode. I think Harper and Ball pair really nicely together in a backcourt on offense, at least. And then I have Edgecombe and Knipple in tier 3 by themselves. And then tier 4, I have Ace Bailey, Colin Murray Boyles, and Derek Queen together. Guys, any final thoughts before we wrap here? Maybe from each of you very quickly, who was the hardest guy to keep out of your top 7?
Malawak.
Well, Trey Johnson's name has come up twice, I think, from other people's rankings here. Like, we've not discussed him today, but I know for both for Brian and Darian, Trey Johnson's 7th. So, and I can see some comments in the chat here from the High Vibe talking about Trey Johnson. So that's probably a guy that maybe not in the same level of detail, but I think he's right around this range. Okay, he just the way the rankings worked out, I think me and Matt are a little bit higher, a little bit lower. I think. But he's a guy who I think is definitely in consideration if they do fall back into that 6 or 7 range.
Yeah, for me, the hardest guy to keep off was probably Malawak, but honestly, I could say that about Queen, Fears as well. Maybe even Jacket Jonas. Sort of like excited to talk more about the deeper lottery prospects, even if those guys aren't as applicable for the Hornets. And yeah, I wish we actually could have gotten into Trey Johnson more. Today's episode, but maybe somewhere further down the line we'll talk about Trey a little bit because there's some pretty often like he's going to be in consideration with Knipple for the best shooter in the draft, even if I like Con I like his shooting profile more. Trey can really score, and I think over the course of the season showed more of his sort of like one-on-one shot creation abilities. Loves this little like mid-post face-up ISOs, which are kind of a funny fit for him, but he was pretty good at those this season too. So, but yeah, for me, I'll just say Malawak, I guess.
Yeah, Malawak for me as well. When you watch him, it makes you think he's like for me at least, I feel as though he's like top 6, 7. And then when you think about it, like you think about the struggles rebounding, which Brian has, talked about a lot, why that is, but it's just hard to really put him above like some other guys I've had. But like watching him, it's obvious that the talent jumps off the page or the screen, but it was just hard for me to kind of find that spot. Maybe in a different day, I would probably have him higher, but I just couldn't.
Yeah, these are all fluid. I'm sure we will all change our big boards multiple times from here on out before the draft. As we wrap, be sure you are subscribed to BuzzBeat Plus at buzzbeat.substack.com, where you can find our updated big boards. You will gain access to a living, breathing document that has our big board, has Richie and James's free agent rankings, trade rankings if you subscribe to BuzzBeat Plus. Also, if you haven't listened to our previous episode, Richie discussed future picks and how Miami making the playoffs affects an incoming draft pick to Charlotte. Be sure to give that a listen. Thank you all for being here. Take care and go Hornets.